The Grand Gala was the event of the year, elegant chandeliers, flowing champagne, and the city's most influential people gathered under one roof. Among them was a wealthy businessman, known for his sharp suits and sharper business deals. By his side, as always, was his wife, a graceful woman who had stood by him through every success and struggle. But tonight, something was different. Instead of his wife, his secretary walked in with him, her arm looped through his. She was younger, dressed in a glittering gown that caught every eye in the room. Whispers spread like wildfire. Where was his wife? Why was his secretary here, smiling like she belonged? The businessman acted as if nothing was unusual, greeting guests with his usual charm. But the tension was thick. His wife had always been his partner at these events, her absence was impossible to ignore. Friends exchanged glances. Some wondered if his wife was ill. Others suspected something darker. Then, halfway through the evening, the unthinkable happened. The doors swung open, and in walked his wife. The room fell silent. She wasn't dressed in her usual understated elegance. Instead, she wore a bold red dress, her chin high, her eyes blazing. She hadn't been invited. She wasn't supposed to be here. The businessman froze. His secretary stiffened beside him. Every guest held their breath, sensing a storm about to break. His wife didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply walked up to the stage, took the microphone from the startled host, and turned to face the crowd. "You all must be wondering why I'm here," she said, her voice steady. "Well, so am I." The room erupted in murmurs. The businessman's face turned pale. His secretary took a step back, suddenly unsure. The wife's gaze locked onto her husband. "You thought replacing me tonight would go unnoticed?" She shook her head, a bitter smile playing on her lips. "But I'm not here to fight. I'm here to tell you all the truth." And with those words, the night took a turn no one could have predicted. The air in the gala hall was electric. All eyes were fixed on the wife as she stood on the stage, gripping the microphone. The businessman's smile had vanished, replaced by a stiff, nervous expression. His secretary looked like she wanted to disappear into the crowd. The wife took a deep breath. "For years," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I stood by his side. Business deals, late nights, public appearances, I was there. Not because I had to be, but because I believed in us." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "But tonight, he chose to replace me. And I want you all to understand why." The crowd leaned in. The businessman clenched his jaw, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. "I found out 3 months ago," the wife continued, "that my husband had been lying to me. Not just small lies, big ones. The kind that change everything." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a bank statement. An account I wasn't supposed to know about. Money that was meant for our future, funneled away, some to his business, some to her." The secretary's face went pale. She shook her head quickly. "That's not." The wife cut her off. "I'm not blaming you. You're just one of many." She turned back to the crowd. "He promised me loyalty. But behind my back, he was building a different life." A murmur of shock rippled through the room. The businessman finally found his voice. "This isn't the place," he said sharply. "We can discuss this at home." The wife laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Home? You haven't been home in months. You've been too busy pretending." She looked back at the guests. "I stayed quiet because I thought things would change. But tonight? Bringing her here, in my place? That was the final insult." The room was dead silent. Then, from the back, someone clapped. Slowly, others joined in. Not everyone, some looked uncomfortable, others stunned, but enough to make the businessman's face burn with humiliation. The wife stepped down from the stage, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She walked straight past her husband, not even glancing at him. But as she reached the doors, she turned back one last time. "Oh, and one more thing," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Lawyers will be in touch." Then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of whispers and a man who realized, far too late, what he had truly lost. The moment the gala doors closed behind his wife, the businessman's world collapsed. The room, once filled with polite chatter and clinking glasses, now buzzed with scandal. Guests whispered behind their hands, some filming on their phones, others shaking their heads in disapproval. The secretary, still standing frozen beside him, looked like she wanted to vanish. He grabbed her arm a little too tightly. "We need to leave. Now." But it was too late. A reporter from a financial magazine stepped forward, phone recording. "Sir, can you confirm your wife's claims about hidden accounts?" The businessman shoved past without answering, dragging his secretary toward the exit. Outside, the flashing lights of paparazzi blinded him. Someone had already tipped them off. He shielded his face, pushing through the chaos until they finally reached his car. Inside, the secretary finally spoke, her voice shaking. "What just happened? You never told me about." "Not now," he snapped, gripping the steering wheel. His mind raced. How did she find out? Who else knew? Meanwhile, his wife sat in the back of a taxi, staring out at the city lights. Her hands were steady, but her heart pounded. For months, she'd played the role of the oblivious spouse, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. Tonight had been that moment. Her phone buzzed, a message from her sister, "You did it. Now stay strong." She exhaled, allowing herself a small, tired smile. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about freedom. The next morning, the scandal exploded. News outlets ran headlines like, "Tycoon's secret life exposed at Gala," and "Wife drops bombshell, divorce looms." The businessman's office was in chaos. Board members demanded emergency meetings. Investors called, furious. His once sterling reputation was crumbling by the hour. Worst of all, his mistress, the secretary, was nowhere to be found. She'd left a single text, "I'm not taking the fall for this." Alone in his penthouse, he poured a drink, his reflection hollow in the floor-to-ceiling windows. He'd underestimated his wife. Badly. And now? The war had only just begun. The businessman sat across from his lawyer in a sleek, high-rise office, the city skyline stretching behind them. The lawyer's face was grim as he slid a folder across the desk. "She's not just filing for divorce," the lawyer said. "She's going after everything, half the business, the properties, even your stake in the overseas ventures." The businessman's hands clenched into fists. "She can't do that. The company was mine before we even met." The lawyer sighed. "She has proof you used marital assets to fund secret deals. Judges don't like that. And after last night's little spectacle?" He shook his head. "The court of public opinion is already against you." A cold knot formed in the businessman's stomach. He had spent years building his empire, and now, in a matter of hours, it was all slipping away. Meanwhile, his wife sat in a cozy cafe with her own legal team, two sharp-eyed women who specialized in high-stakes divorces. They had spread out documents across the table, highlighting key points in bright yellow. "We have him," one of the lawyers said, tapping a paper. "Hidden accounts, unauthorized transfers, even a shell company under his secretary's name. It's all here." The wife sipped her tea, calm but focused. "I don't just want my fair share," she said quietly. "I want him to feel what it's like to lose everything he took for granted." The lawyers exchanged a glance. They had seen vengeful spouses before, but this was different. This woman wasn't screaming or crying, she was precise, methodical, and utterly ruthless. By the end of the week, the first legal bombshell dropped. A judge froze the businessman's assets, pending investigation. News outlets picked up the story, and suddenly, his face was everywhere, not as the powerful tycoon, but as the cheating husband who got caught. His phone rang non-stop, angry investors, nervous partners, even his own mother demanding answers. He ignored them all, pacing his penthouse like a caged animal. Then, the final blow came. An anonymous tip led the financial regulators to his door. They wanted records. They wanted interviews. They wanted to know where all the money had really gone. For the first time in his life, the businessman felt true fear. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was about survival. His wife, on the other hand, was just getting started. She had one last card to play, one she had been saving for the right moment. And when she played it, no one would see it coming. The businessman stared at the legal notice in his hands, his vision blurring with rage. The court had granted his wife temporary control of his family estate, the sprawling property his grandfather had built decades ago. The last piece of his life that still felt like his. His lawyer's voice crackled through the phone speaker, "She's arguing sentimental value," and the judge agreed. "But this isn't over, we can appeal." "Appeal?" The businessman nearly laughed. "By the time that happens, she'll have burned the place down just to spite me." He hurled his glass against the wall, shattering it. He needed leverage. Fast. His wife sat across from a private investigator in a quiet, book-lined study. The investigator slid a grainy photo across the desk, the businessman handing an envelope to a city official at a dimly lit restaurant. "Bribery," the investigator said. "And this is just the start. We've got offshore accounts, falsified safety reports for his factories, enough to bury him." The wife traced the edge of the photo. She'd suspected corruption for years but never had proof. Now she held a grenade with the pin already pulled. "Wait," she said suddenly. "Does this official still take meetings with him?" The investigator nodded. A slow smile spread across her face. He called his mistress, the former secretary, for the first time since the gala. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice wary. "You owe me," he hissed. "You knew about the accounts. If I go down, you're coming with me." A pause. Then, quieter, "What do you want?" "Evidence. Emails, recordings, anything that proves she knew about the money moves too. If we can show she was complicit, this divorce turns into a settlement." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll see what I can find." He hung up, pulse racing. It was a gamble, but it might just work. She walked into the federal investigator's office with a USB drive and one request: whistleblower protection. "What's here?" The agent eyed the drive. "Enough to put a corrupt official and my husband in prison," she said. "But I want immunity, and the estate stays mine." The agent plugged in the drive. As footage of the bribery played, he whistled low. "You've been sitting on this a while." She leaned back. "I was waiting for him to make one last mistake." And bringing his mistress to the gala? That had been it. The businessman woke to pounding on his penthouse door. Federal agents. Warrants in hand. As they hauled him in for questioning, one thought echoed in his skull. She set me up. And the worst part? She'd won. The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room buzzed overhead as the businessman sat handcuffed to the metal table. His custom suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, a far cry from the polished tycoon who had walked into the gala just weeks earlier. The detective across from him flipped open a file. "Let's start with the bribery. Then we'll move on to the offshore accounts, the tax evasion." "I want my lawyer," the businessman snapped. The detective smirked. He's on his way. But here's the thing, your wife already gave us everything. Emails, bank trails, even that little safety inspection you paid off last year. He leaned in. You're done. The only question is whether you'll spend 10 years in prison, or 20. The businessman's throat went dry. His lawyer arrived, pale and sweating. They're offering a deal, he whispered. Plead guilty to financial fraud, and they'll drop the bribery charges. 5 years with good behavior. The businessman's stomach twisted. Prison. Actual prison. And if I don't take it? Then your wife testifies. And with her evidence? You'll lose everything. Before he could answer, the door opened. A guard stepped in. You've got another visitor. The businessman expected his mother. His mistress. Maybe even his wife, here to gloat. But it was none of them. It was his father-in-law. The older man sat across from him, his expression unreadable. They hadn't spoken in years, not since the businessman had sidelined him from the company board. I'm not here to lecture you, the father-in-law said quietly. I'm here to make you an offer. The businessman scoffed. What, you want me to beg? No. I want you to sign. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a divorce settlement. Full ownership of the estate for his wife. No alimony. No further legal action. In exchange, she'd recant her testimony. The bribery charges would vanish. The businessman stared at it. Why would she do this? The old man smiled, a cold, knowing smile. Because she doesn't want you in prison. He leaned closer. She wants you broke. And free. So you can watch her live the life you threw away. Back in his cell, the businessman lay on the thin cot, staring at the ceiling. Sign, and he'd walk away with nothing but the clothes on his back. Fight, and he'd lose decades of his life. His pride screamed no. But his survival instinct? That whispered yes. The pen shook in his hand as he signed the papers. His lawyer exhaled in relief. Smart move. We'll have you out by. I don't care, the businessman muttered. Because in that moment, he realized the truth. His wife hadn't just beaten him. She'd outplayed him. And the game wasn't even over yet. The gates of the detention center clanged shut behind him. The businessman stood on the sidewalk, squinting in the sunlight like a man who hadn't seen it in years, not just days. His penthouse was gone. His cars repossessed. All he had left was the crumpled suit on his back and a burner phone his lawyer had shoved into his hand. He turned it on. One message waited. Look up. Across the street, on the towering digital billboard usually reserved for luxury ads, a new image flashed. His wife, no, his ex-wife now, elegant in a white pantsuit, standing beside the very city official he'd bribed. The headline screamed. New Women's Entrepreneur Fund launches, backed by City Hall. His stomach dropped. That money. His money. She'd used it to buy herself a hero spotlight, and a political ally. The phone buzzed again. An unknown number. He answered, already knowing who it would be. Enjoying the view? Her voice was calm. Amused. He clenched his jaw so hard it ached. What do you want? A thank you would be nice. I just saved you from prison. A pause. But you should hurry. Your old office building is having a renovation party today. The line went dead. 1 hour later, the ultimate humiliation. He stood across from his former corporate headquarters, hidden in the crowd of onlookers. Construction crews were already stripping his name from the building. A stage had been erected out front, draped in banners for a company he didn't recognize. Then she walked out, his ex-wife, arm in arm with a silver-haired man he'd last seen at the Gala. The CEO of his biggest competitor. The microphone screeched as the man spoke, "Today marks a new chapter. With my dear friend's vision and our combined resources, this will be the premier hub for ethical business in the city." The crowd cheered. Cameras flashed. And then, like salt in the wound, his ex-wife stepped forward. "Some of you knew me only as a wife," she said, smiling. "But today? Today I'm a partner." The businessman's breath came in short, ragged bursts. This wasn't just revenge. It was annihilation. She'd taken his money, his contacts, even his legacy, and rebuilt it all in her own image. That night, the breaking point. He sat in a dingy motel bar, downing cheap whiskey. The TV above played news coverage of her grand opening. The Chiron read, "From scandal to success, how one woman rose from a cheated wife to a power player." The bartender slid him another drink. "Rough day?" The businessman didn't answer. His reflection in the mirror was barely recognizable, sunken eyes, unshaven jaw. A loser. But then his phone lit up. An email. From her. The subject line, "You're welcome." He opened it. Attached was a single photo, the inside of his old office. Her feet propped on his desk. And one line of text. "P.S. The secretary sends her regards." Something inside him snapped. Dawn, the reckoning. He stood outside her new penthouse at 4 a.m., swaying slightly from the alcohol. He hadn't planned this. Hadn't thought it through. All he knew was that he couldn't let her win. Not like this. He raised his fist to bang on the door. Just as it swung open. Not her. A police officer. And behind him? His ex-wife, sipping tea, her eyes cold. "I figured you'd come tonight," she said. "Funny. I almost missed your predictability." The officer stepped forward. "Sir, we've had reports of a trespasser." The businessman backed away, hands raised. But as the officer cuffed him, he locked eyes with her one last time. And for the first time, she looked afraid. Because he was smiling. Part 8 of 8, final chapter, 1,500 words. The holding cell stank of sweat and stale coffee. The businessman sat slumped on the bench, his cuffed hands resting on his knees. But unlike before, unlike every other time he'd been humiliated, outplayed, crushed by his ex-wife's moves, he wasn't seething. He was smiling. The door clanged open. His ex-wife stood there, arms crossed, her lawyer hovering behind her. "You look pleased with yourself," she said coldly. Funny, for a man about to be charged with harassment. He tilted his head. "You didn't actually call the cops on me, did you?" A flicker of hesitation crossed her face. He laughed. "Of course you didn't. Because you don't make mistakes like that." He leaned forward. "But I do. Or at least, that's what I let you think." Flashback, 3 days before the gala. The businessman sat in a dimly lit private club, swirling a glass of whiskey. Across from him? The silver-haired CEO, his so-called biggest competitor. "You're sure she'll take the bait?" the CEO asked. The businessman smirked. "She's been waiting for years to catch me slipping. So I'll give her the perfect scandal." He slid a folder across the table. "Plant these in the offshore accounts. Make it obvious. Let her find them." The CEO frowned. "And the secretary? Paid to play her part." The businessman drained his glass. "By the time my wife exposes me, the real money will be untouchable." "And she?" He smiled. "She'll be too busy celebrating to notice the trap." Present day, the trap sprung. Back in the holding cell, his ex-wife's face paled. "You're lying. Check the Cayman accounts," he said softly. "The ones you didn't subpoena." The ones I never touched. He stood, chains clinking. Because all the money you stole from me? That was play money. The real fortune? It's been moving for months. Her lawyer lunged forward. This is absurd. But she held up a hand, eyes locked on her ex-husband. Prove it. He shrugged. Look at who just bought the old Wilson steel plant this morning. She pulled out her phone, fingers flying. Then froze. A shell company. One she didn't recognize. One he'd created 5 years ago, under her maiden name. The truth. You played me perfectly, he said. Public scandal, divorce, even the whistleblower act, all exactly what I needed. He grinned. Because while you were busy destroying my empire, I was liquidating the real one. No taxes. No lawsuits. Just, gone. Her voice shook. The regulators will find nothing. Because you testified under oath that you gave them everything. He leaned in. And who would doubt the woman who won? For the first time, she looked truly terrified. Because she finally understood. This wasn't a divorce. It wasn't revenge. It was the greatest con of his life. And she'd helped him pull it off. Epilogue, 1 month later. The headlines screamed. Disgraced tycoon disappears amidst billion-dollar mystery. His ex-wife sat in her gleaming new office, staring at a postcard with no return address. A single phrase was scrawled on the back. Never bet against the house. She crumpled it in her fist. And for the first time since the gala, she screamed.